Okay, hello everyone. Greetings from Chicago. I would like to thank Professor Fujiwara and Dr. Hussain, and also the entire team at the Institute for Future Initiatives for organizing this wonderful event. I feel very privileged to be part of it. Today, I'm going to talk about a new project that I'm working on. It's about the role of cities in global migration governance. So as you can see, this is actually also very relevant to our previous presentations by two other speakers. So I'm excited to see the connection here and also look forward to hear your feedbacks. Okay, so first of all, let me give you an overview of this picture of global migration. So by definition, global migration or international migrants, there are people who don't live in the country in which they were born. According to the UN, by 2019, there are 272 million international migrants. So they are 3.5% of the world's population. You know, this percentage is not very high, but if you look at the chart on the left, you see over years, there is a constant increase of transnational migration. And in fact, the growth of global migrants is actually faster than the world's population growth. And also, I call global migration an urban phenomenon because 80% of those immigrants live in urban areas. This is also a highly diverse group. You know, there are highly skilled workers, employees, international students, visiting scholars, but also there are these undocumented or irregular immigrants. So basically, there are people who enter the country without legal permits, or they stay there without any legal status. So we don't have an accurate global level estimate of the size of this population, but there are some nation-based data. For instance, in the United States, there are about 12 million undocumented immigrants. And as you can see on this map, 60% of those undocumented immigrants live in 20 of the largest metropolitan areas in the country. So in other words, there is also a high urban concentration of irregular immigrants in different countries. Okay, let's take a look at this governance issue. So apparently, global migration is a transnational political issue. So currently, there are 3 levels of actors involved in the governance. At the supranational level, there are many international arrangements led by the UN, but those international arrangements are not legally binding. So the major actor involving this policy making are the nation states. In fact, migration governance has long been considered part of the state sovereignty. And also we see that the nation states tend to have more restrictive or exclusive immigration policies due to concern for national security. And also there is a welfare state retreat under neoliberalism. There's the reduced provision of public goods to citizens, let alone foreigners. And also in recent years, there is the rise of populism and nativist politics, increasingly exclusive to outsiders. But what I want to mention is we see this increasing role of cities at the subnational level involving in this kind of migration policy making. And in fact, cities have specific strength in involving this kind of issue. Cities are the first responders to the migration issue because of the high urban concentration of the international migrants. And also cities are responsible for different economic and social policies, including economic development, housing, healthcare, education. So cities are at a better position of implementing a holistic approach to integration. And also different studies argue mayors have strength. They are more pragmatic. They are more interested in using this collaborative style of governance. So due to all those different levels of engagement, I argue that although nation states are considered the sovereign actors in international relations, cities have gained increased capacities in shaping the global affairs, not only as arenas, but as actors. So this is what I call, so this is what I mean by the rise of urban sovereignty. And the cities have implemented many inclusive urban policies regarding immigration. Those policies challenge the national sovereignty over immigration and citizenship. So in the rest of my talk, I'm going to explain one particular type of inclusive urban migration policy, sanctuary policy, sanctuary cities. Maybe many of you have heard of this term. So basically, sanctuary cities are cities that offer protection to immigrants that don't have regular or legal status in the country. And many cities have passed laws, ordinances, and those ordinances ask local officials and the police not to ask a person's immigration status, not to follow national immigration policies, and not to cooperate with national immigration authorities. So the first sanctuary city in the world is San Francisco. It became the sanctuary city in mid-1980s during the Central American sanctuary movements. As you see from the images on the right, what the city looks like during the movement. And after San Francisco, many cities in the US and in the world declared as sanctuary cities. But I want to mention this is also a highly controversial issue. As you imagine, one of the controversy is crime. So we heard from Professor Shirley about the relations between migration and crime. And in fact, lots of research shows sanctuary policies do not lead to increase in crime because like Professor Shirley mentioned, many of the crime was actually conducted by the locals, by the rural to urban migrants, not really the transnational migrants. But still, you know, this is an ongoing debate. So this is a picture of sanctuary cities in today's world. My research assistant and I created a database that include the information of all the sanctuary cities in the world. So we include not only cities that clearly declare as sanctuary cities, but also the so-called informal sanctuary cities, which means cities don't have official sanctuary policies, but they do not cooperate with the national immigration authorities. So you can see from this map, it's really a global phenomena. There's a high concentration of sanctuary cities in North America and Europe. But also there are many sanctuary cities in the global south, especially Africa, Southeast Asia, and the Mid East. Okay, let's take a look at this. So why do cities adopt this kind of policies? There are different concerns. So there is certainly the humanitarian concern. The cities want to help the people who are most vulnerable. And also there's the economic concern because the majority of the migrants are at work age. So they are important contributors to the local economy. And also there is a public safety concern. The cities argue this policy actually can encourage immigrants to report crimes to the police and also to work with the police. So in the end, this policy actually can improve public safety. And also there is the, you know, the concern to build the trust between immigration communities and the police state officers and also the public officials in general. So also we found cities usually have those following features if they, you know, if they become a sanctuary city. Usually there are cities governed by progressive political parties. Usually there is a very strong immigration community, become large part of the electorate. So that's related to local election. And also usually there are some social organizations to represent the interests of the immigrants. Okay, so here is a comparative perspective about the sanctuary practices in different regions of the world. So we see actually in different regions, the targets are different. In North America, the major targets of the sanctuary policies are the undocumented migrants. They have been living in those countries, especially America and Canada, for a long time. So one policy is this: don't ask, don't tell. Basically, the local officials and local police don't ask a person's immigration status and don't tell the immigration information to the federal agencies. And also many cities issued municipal ID card for the irregular immigrants and also provide them access to public services like transit or healthcare. Okay, so in Europe, the major targets of the sanctuary policies are the refugees who escaped political violence. So especially during the 2015 European refugee crisis, there was a surge of this kind of immigrants to many European countries. So the cities set up alternative services to the national system, and also many of them coordinate with the local civil society organizations. And some of them even go further. They provide local residency status to those irregular immigrants, like in Spain and Italy. And also in the global south, actually 85% of the world's displaced persons live in the global south. If you remember from Dr. Hussain's map earlier, we know this is really a vibrant global phenomena. And many of those displaced persons in the global south move between countries in the same region, like in Southeast Asia, for instance, like Thailand took lots of migrants from Cambodia and Myanmar, for instance. And also in the global south, there is this weak state capacity. So cities stepped up. They provide the access to healthcare, education, language training to those irregular migrants so they can be integrated into the local labor market. Okay, so in general, we see that the different practices, they share the similarity, which is the cities are expanding the right to the city to immigrants. The right to the city was proposed by French philosopher Henri Lefebvre in 1968, which means residents' collective rights to the urban environment where they inhabit. You see, by this kind of practice, cities are promoting an urban citizenship, which is different from the formal citizenship issued by the nation states. Okay, I want to provide a example of this kind of sanctuary practice. So this is a city called Gaziantep in Turkey. You see from the map, this is a border city between Turkey and Syria. It's a fairly medium-sized city. It has only 2 million people. But in the past few years, it has absorbed 500,000 Syrian refugees. To give you a background, Turkey as a country absorbed 3.6 million Syrian refugees. So this small city alone took 500,000. So how did they do that? Important reason is the integration model implemented by the city government. So the idea is that Turks and Syrians would receive equal treatment and benefits. We know, this huge inflow of irregular immigrants would bring huge demand for services, would also create burden for the local government. So the city government used the international aid, especially the grant from the EU, to build more facilities, including housing, hospitals, and schools. And more interestingly, they make all those facilities available to both Turks and Syrians. Because as the local official mentioned, if you only help the Syrians, there is going to be conflict. So in other words, they make it non-discriminative. So it helped the immigrants, also helped the locals, and enhanced the service infrastructure in the city as a whole. You can see from the photos on the left, local children and immigrant children are studying in the public schools together, and Turkish women and Syrian women are they were cooking together in a community center. And also, this is an industrial city. It has a vibrant textile industry. So many irregular immigrants work in the industry as workers. And also some of them work in other sectors like recycling, for instance, you see from the photo as unskilled labor. So the end is that with this increase of population, the creation of facilities, the city is actually booming economically. So the mayor of Gaziantep said this in the interview. She said, migration has always been with us. It's not a problem to be solved, but a reality you have to manage. you should see the advantages. So apparently, local officials' creativity in dealing with this issue, supported by international or national grants, are very important, for a healthy integration of the irregular migrants. All right, so cities don't work alone. They form different networks. So those are basically platforms to share knowledges and the best practices at the very beginning. But later, those networks become channels for cities to demand a higher role in decision-making nationally and internationally. So for instance, in the US, you see there are some city networks. Each of them include nearly over 100 mayors all over the country. So the mayors use those networks to take collective legal action against the federal government, which I'm going to talk about in just 1 minute. And also in Europe, there are more city networks. And through those networks, cities pressure national governments to comply with their asylum obligations and to demand more resources. And there's also this major city network in the Global South, Mediterranean host municipalities learning network, including cities in the Middle East, North Africa, and Europe. And also I want to highlight the last one. So in 2018, when the UN member states were signing this UN Global Compact for Migration, over 150 cities signed this Marrakesh Mayoral Declaration. So that's the image you see on the left. So through this declaration, the mayors and the cities call for a formal recognition of the role of local governments in global migration governance. Okay, but despite those collective action and the successful cases, we know this practice of sanctuary policies is not without conflicts. So apparently, cities are limited in terms of resources, legitimacy, and also more importantly, there is this increased tension between national governments and their cities. We know for a long time, immigration policy is part of the foreign policy, is strongly held by the national government. But the sanctuary policies challenges the national sovereignty over immigration and citizenship. So here we see this tension. So for instance, in the United States, there has been a series of legal fights between the former Trump administration and the sanctuary cities. The former US President, Mr. Trump, said sanctuary cities are the best friends of gangs and the cartel. And also the federal government, including the Department of Justice, threatened to cut their federal funding. So the photo you see was taken during the annual meeting of the US Conference of Mayors in Washington, DC in January 2018. The person who was speaking was then Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel. So he was surrounded by other mayors and he was condemning the federal government for their policy, for their decision to cut the funding for the sanctuary cities. And around the same time, several cities filed a lawsuit against the federal government, and they actually won 2 of them and lost 1. So I saw the update is currently the Biden administration urged the Supreme Court to dismiss all the pending cases regarding the sanctuary cities. So we are very interested in seeing, what the new development is between the federal government and the sanctuary cities in this country. And there are some similar conflicts between the European cities and their national governments, especially in Italy and in Spain. Okay, and finally, I want to talk about some of the conclusions and the implications of the research for theory building and for policy. We know for a long time, immigration policy is a privilege of the nation states, and the nation states can decide who can come, who can stay, and under what conditions. But in recent decades, cities begin to claim their autonomy over this issue. So cities begin to show increased international influence, but this also has caused increased intergovernmental tensions between the local level and the national level. So this issue theoretically leads us to think about the nature of sovereignty in the context of globalization and urbanization. We begin to see the contested nature of sovereignty. Secondly, we see that global migration governance is a multi-level process. It involves not only political actors, local, national governments, it also involves transnational actors as well as non-state actors. So to have collaboration is a key for more successful regularization and integration of irregular immigrants. And as the old saying goes, all politics is local. And also we see that cities have special strength in dealing with many policy issues. So it's important for policymakers to think globally, act locally. And finally, we see that this is really a challenge facing cities and the countries in both the global north and the global south, in both the developing world and the developed world. So it's important for both scholars and policymakers to move beyond this north-south divide, to have collaborations, conversations, and to learn from each other. Okay, I would like to end my presentation by sharing with you some arts. This is a mural by my favorite street artist, Banksy. It's called Anti-Immigration Birds. So I just want to show this by emphasizing that transnational migration, especially undocumented immigration, is a very controversial, complex issue. There are still many things for us to figure out. And I hope this, beginning of this project can offer some food for thoughts. Thank you so much. Look forward to your feedbacks.
Thank you so much, Professor Zhang, for this fascinating presentation. My last but not least, may I request Takenaka Sensei, please?
Thank you very much. I'm especially, grateful for this team, and also, I think for me it is very important to see the issue of cities or urban politics, after the decades of my studies of India. Today, this is just a sketch from Indian history, and in fact, it's my research project, but it's reflecting what I have been doing for a long time about Indian politics. I would like to give you the portraits of the growing city, especially Bombay and Mumbai, in those more than 2 centuries, 19th, 20th, and 21st centuries. In fact, the city, especially the big city Bombay or Mumbai, has been the dynamo of the historical transformation of India or Indian subcontinent. But if you see the states, actually from the colonial states, which was established in 19th century, to nation states, which was established in mid-20th century, now we are facing a kind of metamorphosis of nation state towards the kind of globalized nation state. So Mumbai is the core of the change of India. So I'd like to share the portraits of India from the history of Bombay and Mumbai. And if I could point out some main functions of central cities, it's like universal arguments, but as the 3 speakers already mentioned about the, what's going on in the cities, historical and contemporary, actually 4 dimensions I would like to pick up. One is my interest is political, actually theater or stage, and what happens in the big cities would be, shared by a larger audience. And actually, if you are going to do something like terrorist attack or something like political campaign, the city, big cities will be the stage. You should do that in that, context. And economic center or financial center, of course, why so many people go to the cities, especially the big cities? That means they wouldn't starve. They would get the job. They would get whatever, remnants of the growing economy. So economic center and financial center. And also cultural hub. And of course, the universities are situated in big cities or main cities, and media, all of them, big ones have their offices in the cities. So actually cities create the, national discourse or global discourse or other discourses. So cities could be the center of the, filmmaking or TV programs, but also news printing or academic publication, etc. So 1920s, 21st centuries, the cities have been the hub of culture or ideological, creation. And the end is, actually, this is interesting. The end is residential society. And in fact, the city residential people are not truly indigenous, and they come from other places, not only from the country or from the foreign places, but also it means like cities are the place of immigrants. So, but they, after a long time, they think they are true Bombay persons. Others are, very poor, illegal immigrants, etc., etc. So residential society, what kind of civil society they are going to make. So these things are combined. And the other thing is like, if you see the colonial state or nation state or others, legal structure, political system. So formal domain is, of course, is there, established. And legal domain, of course, like, high codes or federal codes, etc. there. So legal domains are there, but always, as many people mentioned, illegal sectors or criminal sectors or informal domain of economics, black economy, etc., gathered in the big cities. So those functions we can see, and I could see in the history of Mumbai. And this is a portrait of mid-19th century or late 19th century. And this is a city of British Empire. And for a long time, we have been told that because of the British Empire, India was impoverished and deprived. But in fact, because of the Industrial Revolution in the main country, the colonial city, port city, Bombay, became a kind of financial center and later industrial center itself. So this is a visible scene of the colonial state, the government and the institutions, and of course judicial codes. And the other is economic center and cultural center, bank or companies and also universities. So this was the development from the, colonial port, only colonial port city, Bombay, with British forts or British commercial house or storage house and church and some other things, to the big colonial state. And this is the late 19th century and early 20th century and industrialized colonial city, port city, Bombay. And many cotton mills were made mainly by the British capital, but some of them established by the Indian capital. But anyway, cotton mills. And of course, if you have large farms, you will have lots of people work for that. So labor unions and movements started very early in India, in Bombay. And the other political scene began in this big city. It's like politics of nationalism, nationalist parties. 1885, the first Indian National Congress was established in the city of Bombay, and lots of educated, English-speaking, bilingual elite gathered to talk about their problem. And then they found the word nation. even at the time, following the political discourse in Europe and other kind, America, etc. So politics of nationalism, culture of nationalism began in big cities, of course, including Calcutta, Madras, but Bombay was one of the core. And at the same time, popular mass politics of nationalism, actually new phenomena, began in the big cities, especially in Bombay. So Gandhian movements were, staged in the big cities to begin the nationwide campaign. And mid-20th century, 1947, independence came after the Second World War, and partition, already mentioned in Nakamizu-san's talk, but partition, Pakistan and India, and then migration. So Bombay invited lots of migrants and refugees, and lots of refugee camps, in those areas. And it made the different Bombay, lots of people became the new citizens of the city because of the partition. And because of that, they carried lots of history behind them. And after that, during the nation building, actually this place, region, had to be rearranged for the new nation state in the federal system. And they are going to make the new state, Maharashtra, Marathi-speaking Maharashtrian people's state. But at the same time, Bombay, because of the history, was multilingual, multi-ethnic, multi-religious, lots of multi, place. So lots of, not indigenous, people who come from, distant places were dominant in the cities. So sons of the soil, Marathi-speaking people, and especially, those new immigrants from the, rural areas to the city, they said, we are the owner of the city. So anti-South Indian, anti-Tamil, English-speaking middle-class people movements began. And then later it became anti-communist, anti-labor unions, because labor unions were established, organization. They are the elite compared to the informal sector, unemployed, poor indigenous people. So anti-communist labor unions. And then later, especially 80s and 90s, anti-Islamic movements, but representing indigenous, people's voices, establishment of the new party, Shiv-Sena, and, cartoonist, it's like another side of Bombay, media power, and he became the charismatic leader of this indigenous, really ethnic, in fact, fundamentalist movements. But at the same time, like other cities, because this is a city of lots of new people and also advanced progressive ideas and movements. So this was a city of democracy and civil society and advocacy, representing diversity and cosmopolitanism and protest movements against the coercive government. And this is a photo of, anti-Indira Gandhi emergency regime. And in the center, the charismatic leader, Jayaprakash Narayan, Gandhian socialist leader from Bihar, Nakamizu-san's state. But it's just like that, again, democracy, civil rights, and of course, women's rights or labor unions or Kisan, farmers union, etc., and also media, films, and intellectuals. All those people are very, active in the city. So always new movements began in the city too. And interestingly, this is my another topic, but why, Hindu rights or Hindu fundamentalist movements began, and to attract lots of popular supports in 1980s, but especially after, India gave up socialism in 1990s, and when India began to globalize itself in like 21st century, the rise of Hindu rights. And Bombay was one of the city of, strongholds of Hindu rights. One is representing Marathi ethnic nationalism, Shiv Sena, and BJP combined with BJP, Bharatiya Janata Party, today's ruling party's, organization. And in early 1990s, there was a violence, in North India, Ayodhya riots, but it was also triggered by the organization of Shiv Sena. And then simultaneously riots began in Bombay. So it's a big shift from the peaceful metropolitan, welcoming all the outsiders kind of Bombay to really Hindu rights fundamentalist type of city politics. And now today, I jump to today, globalizing India and the city of Mumbai. And lots of things are going on, lots of money are going around, and lots of rich people go there, and Mumbai producing lots of films to influence other countries, other people. But there probably, if I get the short portraits of Mumbai today, the left is, the target of international or terrorism, Islamic terrorism. And the other is today's coronavirus operation, and poor people, and even the organization of the informal sector, lots of mafia type organization, those things are really working very hard to, let people not contaminated by the virus. So it has been successful in the big slum. So like other people are saying, I think we are seeing big change, but I think the city is one of the core which we should see, how the nation states are changing, and at the time of globalization, how if I'm using the Professor Hussein's word, today's contemporary, lots of multidimensional stresses, people will survive with the, using the structure of states, but also city and civil society, etc. And that's all I would like to say. And lastly, I would like to say, I was mentioned about a book on Gandhi. Actually, my study of India has been centered on Gandhi and nationalism. And in fact, many people think Gandhi was really indigenous, religious figure, always stuck to Indian society and traditional society, but it's not true. Gandhi, if please remember the portraits of Bombay, he came from the small princely states and from the capital of the state. So he was a city mouse. And then he went to Mumbai, and he went to London, and he went to actually South Africa. And so he was jumping around the world like global traveler, and became the immigrants. And then he returned to go back home. So actually Gandhian nationalism is a kind of immigrants nationalism, which it was not rare, because Chiang Kai-shek or, Hussain and many other, nationalist leaders studied about the foreign countries, and also China, Xu Enlai, many, Asian nationalist leaders were global travelers. And I think when we think about the nation state, maybe this is one of the hints, what was the origin of nation states. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much. This is fascinating, and I feel bad that we didn't get to hear more of this. We're also, I just request Professor Fujiwara as well to step in with just one final thought, that I really liked how you mentioned Gandhi, Gandhi's politics as being an immigrant's politics. I think that's fascinating, because we usually think of migrants and refugees as, not we, but generally they're portrayed in the negative light. So thank you for that. And with that, Professor Fujiwara.
No, thank you. We are not traveling these days because of COVID-19, but for this past 90 minutes, we did cover quite a large a number of places in the globe. We started with Professor Shelley's discussion, which can only be called a wide world of crime, that brings together on the waterfront. If you have not seen that film, just watch it today. It's a wonderful film which resonates with a number of crime in global cities, past and present. And then we moved on to Nakamizo Sensei's discussion about Modi and COVID, which can only be called forced movement of people with dictatorial powers, where, to unquote Nakamizo-san, it's still a democracy, a word that is becoming less and less convincing. And then Professor Zhang did a fascinating work on the governance of global migration in her discussion about sanctuary cities, which is actually the way to cope in public policy and about the challenges that come from the movement of people. And finally, Professor Takenaka discussed a city's history, Bombay, if not Mumbai. And her final comment that Gandhi was a global traveler is a remarkable insight into the origin of liberal thoughts in the Asian region, or globally speaking, not coming out from quote national society unquote, but always threatened by the specter of comparison, to quote Hosuri Sal, in an imagined space that expands beyond national borders. Thank you very much indeed for a remarkable discussion here. One thing I can say is that we opened more questions than giving answers. And that's a sign of a good meeting. And that's a sign of a good meeting, but I would very much look forward to an outcome from this group in a manner where the questions are even better established in a manner that can reach a much wider audience. I guess we are on to an excellent project, and I very much thank you for your participation. So with this, back to you, Dr. Hussain.
Thank you so much. Thank you for all the presentations. I learned a lot, definitely. Well, the next task for us is to bring all these perspectives together for a central thread, which weaves these case studies and perspectives. So please stay tuned, and I guess that should conclude our meeting.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. And
good morning
I'd like
to
to
you.
thank all the speakers and all the participants for this workshop. Thank you very much indeed. Without you, nothing would happen. Thank you.